What's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. Today is February 24th, 2026, about 6:20 p.m. where I'm at right now. And we are continuing our 19th book in our Book to React series where we read an entire text cover to cover. This book here is a request from a longtime follower and friend, Nelson Moreno. It is Mark Fisher's mini book, Capitalist Realism. Is There No Alternative? For today's reading, we will be tackling the chapter 6 and 7. And these are the next to last few chapters of this very short book where Mark Fisher just writes a collection of essays and thoughts analyzing our new postmodern, post-Soviet, neoliberal world order and the contradictions within them. I find this very exciting. It's a very dope book, very enlightening book. Interesting. Some parts I disagree with, like Mark Fisher attacking mental health as a solely individual problem and not, he's attacking the mental health industry as if it's, just an illusion and it's not real that people have mental health problems as an individual, as if they only come from the systems and contradictions that we live under capitalism. But other than that, there's a lot of cool stuff in this book. I'm glad I'm finally reading it. Thank you, Nelson, for suggesting it. And if you have any other books that you think will be good for the Book to React series, put them in the comments section and we will try to read them. We will try to get to them. Without further ado, let's read chapter 6 today. It's titled, All That Is Sold Melts into PR, Market Stalinism and Bureaucratic Anti-Production. Leah H1R8H says, "You're from America." Unfortunately, yes, I'm from the evil empire. I'm from the great Satan. I'm from the land where we exterminate the natives and enslave the African. You know what I'm saying? Leah says we should read Harry Potter. You know what? I might consider that. Because I'm old enough to remember when the Christian Zionist nationalist in my small ass town of Monroe, Louisiana, had a Harry Potter book burning. If you don't know, in America, there was a time when a bunch of crazy white people, mostly white people, were burning the Harry Potter books because they said it went against Christian values. I'm old enough to remember that era. So maybe I should read those books that all the people that I really hate, Southerners in general, were burning Harry Potter books. I'll never forget that. Yes, I should read Harry Potter just to say, fuck you, Nana. Fuck you, Jim Bub. Anyway, let's do this. Chapter 6, all that is solid melts into PR, market Stalinism and bureaucratic anti-production. Mike Judge's unjustly under-celebrated film, Office Space, which came out in 1999, is as acute an account of the 90s and 2000s workplace as Schrader's Blue Collar in 1978 was of 70s labor relations. Instead of the confrontations between trade union officials and management in a factory, Judge's film shows a corporation sclerotized by administrative anti-production. Workers receive multiple memos from different managers saying the exact same thing. Naturally, the memo concerns a bureaucratic practice. It aims to induce compliance with a new procedure of putting cover sheets on reports. In keeping with the being smart ethos, the management style in Office Space is a mixture of shirt sleeves informality and quiet authoritarianism. Judge shows this same managerialism presides in the corporate coffee chains where the office workers go to relax. Here, staff are required to decorate their uniforms with 7 pieces of flair, for example, badges or other personal tokens, to express their individuality and creativity, and the illustration of the way in which creativity and self-expression have become intrinsic to labor-controlled societies, which, as Paolo Verno, Jan Mulier Butang, and others have pointed out, now makes effective as well as productive demands on workers. Furthermore, the attempt to crudely quantify these affective contributions also tells us a great deal about the new arrangements. The flare example also points to another phenomenon: hidden expectations behind official standards. Joanna, a waitress at the coffee chain, wears exactly 7 pieces of flare, but it is made clear to her that even though 7 is officially enough, it is actually inadequate. The manager asks if she wants to look the sort of person who only does the bare minimum, who wants to look like the sort of person who only does the bare minimum. So yeah, shout out to Leah H1 up in the chat saying you deserve a sub. I appreciate that. Subscribe to the channel, support this content. We do movie reviews and book reviews on this channel, as well as travel content every now and then. All right. Shout out to NT10606 up in the chat as well, showing love and appreciation. I appreciate that, NT1. All right. Continuing here. You know what, Stan? If you want me to wear 37 pieces of flare, Joanna complains, why don't you make the minimum 37 pieces of flare? Well, the manager replies, I thought I remembered you saying that you wanted to express yourself. Enough is no longer enough. This syndrome will be familiar to many workers who may find that a satisfactory grading and a performance evaluation is no longer satisfactory. In many educational institutions, for instance, if after a classroom observation a teacher is graded as satisfactory, they will be required to undertake training prior to a reassessment. Initially, it might appear to be a mystery that bureaucratic measures should have intensified under neoliberal governments that have presented themselves as anti-bureaucratic and anti-Stalinist. Yet new kinds of bureaucracy, aims and objectives, outcomes, mission statements have proliferated, even as neoliberal rhetoric about the end of top-down centralized control has gained preeminence. It might seem that bureaucracy is a kind of return of the repressed, ironically re-emerging at the heart of a system which has professed to destroy it. But the resurgence of bureaucracy and neoliberalism is no more than an atavism or an anomaly. So what I'm getting here is that he's saying, like, you know, when they defeated the Soviets and the communists and whatever, the capitalist West is saying, like, we defeated bureaucracy and people just sitting around all day pushing papers and doing nothing and pretending to work. But if you've ever had a modern job in the West, that's all it is. You don't know how much bullshit paperwork I have to do for teaching English. Literally, my Saturdays and Sundays, 6 hours of them are gone. 6 hours of them are gone every single Saturday or Sunday just doing bullshit paperwork that now is becoming even more bullshit because of AI. And if you've seen the film Office Space or any other film that basically critiques workplace culture in America, like The Office or The Office UK, you know, the poor the poor spinoff, no matter what you tell me, The Office UK is the spinoff of the original Office. All work now is bullshit. And the same sort of processes and the same sort of malaise that was in The Office of the worst type of command market economy in the Soviet Union exists in American offices today. I'm going to continue here. As I have already indicated, there is no contradiction between being smart and the increase of administration and regulation. There are two sides of labor and control societies. Richard Sennett has argued that the flattening of pyramidal hierarchies has actually led to more surveillance of workers. One of the claims made for the new organization of work is that it decentralizes power, that is, gives people in the lower ranks of organization more control over their own activities, Sennett writes. Certainly, this claim is false in terms of the techniques employed for taking apart the old bureaucratic behemoths. The new information systems provide a comprehensive picture of the organization to top managers in ways which give individuals anywhere in the network little room to hide. But it isn't only that information technology has granted managers more access to data. It is that the data itself has proliferated. Much of the information is provided by workers themselves. Massimo De Angelis and David Harvey describe some of the bureaucratic measures with which a lecturer must comply when putting together a module for an undergraduate degree in British universities. For each module, De Angelis and Harvey write, the module leader, ML, i.e. lecturer, must complete various paperwork, in particular, a module specification at the module start, which lists the module aims and objectives, ILOs, modes and methods of assessment, amongst other information, and a module review document at the end of the module in which the ML or lecturer reports their own assessment of the module's strengths and weaknesses and their suggested changes for the following year. A summary of student feedback and average marks and their dispensation. Somebody kill me now. Kill me now, just reading that. I don't want to be a professor no more. I said I wanted to go and be a college. I give up now. I give up on this whole intellectual academic life. Bullshit. I give up. I give up because I know that's the future that awaits and I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. I still want to get educated. I want to get my degree, but after I get it, I want to burn it. I'm going to get it and burn it because this is ridiculous. The type of paperwork, the type of bullshit paperwork you have to do to be a teacher of any type is insane. But in every job, there's bullshit work. And in fact, there are entire bullshit jobs. CEO. CEO. Anyway, go in here to the comment section real quick. Shout out to Himothy. Shout out to Himothy up in the chat as well. We're going to continue building here. We're going to continue building and reading Mark Fisher's text. So this is only the beginning, however. For the degree program as a whole, academics must prepare a program specification, as well as producing annual program reports, which record student performance according to progression rates, withdrawal rates, location, and spread of marks. All student marks have to be graded against a matrix. This auto-surveillance is complemented by assessments carried out by external authorities. The marking of student assignments is monitored by external examiners who are supposed to maintain consistency of standards across the university sector. Lecturers have to be observed by their peers, while departments are subject to periodic 3 or 4 day inspections by the Quality Assurance Agency for Higher Education. If they are research active, lecturers must submit their best 4 publications every 4 or 5 years to be graded by panel as part of the research assessment exercise. Wow, replaced in 2008 by the equally controversial Research Excellence Framework. DeAngelis and Harvey are clear that these are only very sketchy accounts of only some of the bureaucratic tasks that academics have to perform, all of which have funding implications for institutions. This battery of bureaucratic procedures is by no means confined to universities, nor to education. Other public services, such as the National Health Service and the police force, find themselves enmeshed in similar bureaucratic metastases. This is in part a consequence of the inherent resistance of certain processes and services to marketization. The supposed marketization of education, for instance, rests on a confused and underdeveloped analogy. Are students the consumers of the service or its product? The idealized market was supposed to deliver friction-free exchanges in which the desires of consumers would be met directly without the need for intervention or mediation by regulatory agencies. Yet the drive to assess the performance of workers and to measure forms of labor which, by their nature, are resistant to quantification has inevitably required additional layers of management and bureaucracy. What we have is not a direct comparison of workers' performance or output, but a comparison between the audited representation of that performance and output. Inevitably, a short-circuiting occurs and work becomes geared towards the generation and massaging of representations rather than to the official goals of the work itself. Indeed, an anthropological study of local government in Britain argues that more effort goes into ensuring that a local authority services are represented correctly than goes into actually improving those services. This reversal of priorities is one of the hallmarks of a system which can be characterized without hyperbole as market Stalinism. What late capitalism repeats from Stalinism is just this valuing of symbols, of achievement over actual achievement. As Marshall Berman explained, describing Stalin's White Sea Canal project of 1931 to 1933, Stalin seems to have been so intent on creating a highly visible symbol of development that he pushed and squeezed the project in ways that only retarded the development of the project. Thus, the workers and the engineers were never allowed the time, money, or equipment necessary to build a canal that would be deep enough and safe enough to carry 20th century cargoes. Consequently, the canal has never played any significant role in Soviet commerce or industry. All the canal could support, apparently, were tourist steamers, which in the 1930s were abundantly stocked with Soviet and foreign writers who obligingly proclaimed the glories of the work. The canal has a triumph of publicity, but if half the care that went into the public relations campaign had been devoted to the work itself, there would have been far fewer victims and far more real developments, and the project would have been a genuine tragedy, rather than a brutal farce in which real people were killed by pseudo-events. In a strange compulsion to repeat, the ostensibly anti-Stalinist, neoliberal, New Labor government has shown the same tendency to implement initiatives in which real-world effects matter only insofar as they register at the level of PR appearance. The notorious targets which the New Labor government was so enthusiastic in imposing are a case in point, in a process that repeats itself with iron predictability everywhere that they are installed. Targets quickly cease to be a way of measuring performance and become ends in themselves. Anxiety about falling standards in school examinations is now a regular feature of the summertime in Britain. Yet if students are less skilled and knowledgeable than their predecessors, this is due not to a decline in the quality of examination per se, but to the fact that all of the teaching is geared towards passing the exams. Narrowly focused exam drill replaces a wider engagement with subjects. Similarly, hospitals perform many routine procedures instead of a few serious urgent operations, because this allows them to hit the targets they are assessed on, operating rates, success rates, and reduction in waiting time more effectively. It would be a mistake to regard this market Stalinism as some deviation from the true spirit of capitalism. On the contrary, it will be better to say that an essential dimension of Stalinism was inhibited by its association with the social project like socialism, and can only emerge in a late capitalist culture in which images acquire an autonomous force. The way value is generated on the stock exchange depends, of course, less on what a company really does and more on perceptions of and beliefs about its future performance. In capitalism, that is to say, all that is solid melts into PR or public relations. And late capitalism is defined at least as much by this ubiquitous tendency towards public relations production as it is by the imposition of market mechanisms. Very interesting parallel he's trying to say here. He's saying that Stalinism and late stage capitalism have a lot in common. Basically, that Stalinism was all about show. What can we produce and what can we tell people the future has in store? And that's how people bought into Stalinism. And late stage capitalism, we basically say, how much do you think Uber will be in the next 30 years when it's finally profitable? Because if I'm smart as I think I am, Uber to this day still is not a profitable company. It's only propped up by billionaire investors continuing to pour money into a company that lights it on fire. Similar to the way Amazon for many years was unprofitable, Tesla was unprofitable for many years, and your favorite social media company was unprofitable for multiple years. Think about that. That's what our system is about. Our economy doesn't grow in America. Our economy doesn't make things in America. We're not getting richer in America just because GDP goes up. GDP only goes up, and we're only considered a rich nation just because ChatGPT maybe in the future might make money. That's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. Okay, so anyway, going here to the comment section. Shout out to Clot. Shout out to Klotz in the comment section. Shout out to Noah78516 in the comment section as well. Shout out to everybody showing love in the comments, increasing the conversation. Let's keep this going as we continue to read Mark Fisher's Capitalist Realism. Let's continue here. So here, Zizek's elaboration of Lacan's concept of the big other is crucial. The big other is the collective fiction, the symbolic structure presupposed by any social field. The big other can never be encountered in itself. Instead, we only ever confront its stand-ins. These representatives are by no means always leaders. In the example of the White Sea Canal above, for instance, it wasn't Stalin himself who was the representative of the big other, so much as the Soviet and foreign writers who had to be persuaded of the glories of the project. One important dimension of the big other is that it does not know everything. It is this constitutive ignorance of the big other that allows public relations to function. Indeed, the big other could be defined as the consumer of PR and propaganda, the virtual figure which is required to believe even when no one individual can. To use one of Zizek's examples, who was it, for instance, who didn't know that really existing socialism was shabby and corrupt? Once again, I repeat, Zizek asked the question, the rhetorical question, who didn't know that the economic system of Czechoslovakia or Belarus wasn't fucked up during the Soviet times? We all knew it. We all knew Yugoslavia was a bit fucked up. We knew Romania was kind of a shithole country. We knew it. We knew it. Not any of the people who were all too aware of its shortcomings, nor any of the government administrators who couldn't but know. No, it was the big other who was the one deemed not to know, who wasn't allowed to know the quotidian reality of the really existing socialist countries. Yet the distinction between what the big other knows, that is, what is officially accepted, and what is widely known and experienced by actual individuals is very far from being merely emptily formal. It is the discrepancy between the two that allows ordinary social reality to function. When the illusion that the big other did not know can no longer be maintained, the incorporeal fabric holding the social system together disintegrates. This is why Khrushchev's speech in 1965, in which he admitted the failings of the Soviet state, was so momentous. It is not as if anyone in the party was unaware of the atrocities and corruption carried out in its name, but Khrushchev's announcement made it impossible to believe anymore that the big other was ignorant of them. So basically what he's saying here is like, essentially, at the time of the shitty Soviet states like Romania, Bulgaria, any of the, countries in the Soviet Union, they knew that there were problems in this system, right? But now let's think about how that all fell apart. Basically, Khrushchev and Gorbachev basically said, you know what, let's talk openly about how the system is corrupt and fucked up and how we need to change. We need glasnost and perestroika. Imagine if we did that in America. Imagine if Trump, his dumbass, came out tomorrow and said, you know what, America is a country that is absolutely unfair, where millions of children every single day go without eating, where millions of people can barely afford to pay the rent, where millions of people who are alive today will probably die in poverty because we are taking away the social safety net bit by bit by bit. We're taking away the social safety net for all the poor people and the elderly and the young people in our next generation because us boomers sucked the country dry. Imagine if he just pulled the fucking covers off of everything, and then he just revealed how fucked up America is, how there is no real democracy, how there is no economic certainty, how us being the richest nation in the world means that just a few corporations make billions and billions of dollars every single year. How about if he actually did that? Then the whole shit would just fall apart. Of course. And not only Trump, of course, that would just be one rich white man that would have to do it. But if all of them did it in unison, if they all dropped that singular tweet saying, yeah, this is the oligarchy now, okay? So think about that. If that actually happened, then that's what I think would make the system fall. And I think that's what Zizek is trying to get at here when he says the big other cannot pretend to be ignorant anymore. Giving a shout out to Pedro Montalvallo Jr. up in the chat. Shout out to Pedro. Shout out to Fit TJ up in the chat as well. And everybody else joining the live stream conversation as we continue to read Mark Fisher's Capitalist Realism. So let's continue here. So So much for really existing socialism. But what of really existing capitalism? One way to understand the realism of capitalist realism is in terms of the claim to have given up belief in the big other. Postmodernism can be construed as the name for the complex of crises that the decline in the belief in the big other has triggered. As Lyotard's famous formulation of the postmodern condition, incredulity towards meta-narratives suggest. Jameson, of course, would argue that the incredulity towards meta-narratives is one expression of the cultural logic of late capitalism, a consequence of the switch into the post-Fordist mode of capital accumulation. Nick Land gives one of the most euphoric accounts of the postmodern meltdown of culture into the economy. In Land's work, a cybernetically upgraded invisible hand is progressively eliminating centralized state power. Land's 90s text synthesized cybernetics, complexity theory, cyberpunk fiction, and neoliberalism to construct a vision of capital planetary artificial intelligence, a vast, supple, endlessly fissile system which renders humans' will obsolete. In his manifesto for nonlinear, decentered capital, Meltdown, Land invokes a massively distributed, matrix networked tendency oriented to disabling ROM command control programs, sustaining all macro and micro governmental entities, globally concentrating themselves as the human security system. This is capitalism as a shattering reel in which viral digital signals circulate on self-sustaining networks which bypass the symbolic and therefore do not require the big other as guarantor. It is Deleuze and Guattari's capital as unnameable thing, but without the forces of re-territorialization and anti-production, which they argued were constitutive of capitalism. One of the problems of Land's position is also what is most interesting about it, precisely that it posits a pure capitalism, a capitalism which is only inhibited and blocked by extrinsic rather than internal elements, according to Land's logic. These elements are atavisms that will eventually be consumed and metabolized by capital. Yet capitalism cannot be purified in this way. Strip away the forces of anti-production and capitalism disappears with it. Similarly, there is no progressive tendency towards an unsheathing of capitalism, no gradual unmasking of capital as it really is, rapacious, indifferent, inhuman. On the contrary, the essential role of the incorporeal transformations effectuated by PR, branding, and advertising in capitalism suggests that in order to operate effectively, capitalism's rapacity depends upon various forms of sheathing. Really existing capitalism is marked by the same division which characterized really existing socialism, between, on the one hand, an official culture in which capitalist enterprises are presented as socially responsible and caring, and on the other, a widespread awareness that companies are actually corrupt, ruthless, etc. In other words, capitalist postmodernity is not quite as incredulous as it would appear to be, as the jeweler Gerald Ratner famously found to his cost. Ratner precisely tried to circumvent the symbolic and tell it how it is, describing the inexpensive jewelry his shop sold as crap in an after-dinner speech. But the consequence of Ratner making this judgment official were immediate and serious. 50 million pounds was wiped off the value of the company, and he lost his job. Customers might previously have known that the jewelry Ratner sold was poor quality, but the big other didn't know. As soon as it did, Ratner's collapsed. So basically, what he's saying there in that long-ass paragraph, what he's saying here in that long-ass paragraph is very simple. In socialism, the way it fell apart was basically the socialist leaders admitting, hey, there's some problems in our system, and maybe our system is not going to work. The way capitalism works is that everybody pretends it does. Or, to be more precise, we sort of know this shit is fucked up. We know it's fucked up that there are kids in Congo who have to jump in a mine and use their little tiny hands to grab cobalt to make our iPhones. We know it's pretty fucked up that we walk outside and we see people sleeping on the street, that we pee on. We know it's pretty fucked up that we know in every single country, it doesn't matter if it's the richest country in the world, whether it be Switzerland or the poorest country in Burundi, we know that there is somebody going hungry tonight when there is more food on this planet that could feed everybody 3 times over. We know it's fucked up, but we don't admit it. We sort of pretend like it can work. And we don't have any sort of name to this ideology and system that we sort of created. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, that's what it is. That's what it is. I'm going to take a look, okay? I'm going to take a look. Okay, I'm going to take a look here at the comment section. Shout out to Beautiful Bill, who was up in here, but then he started acting a fool. Shout out to AJ4K. Those people who are rich all made a choice to be their best. Okay, AJ4K is one of those people who will let Elon Musk bust a nasty nut in his mouth. AJ4K would open up wide and let Elon Musk bust a nasty fat South African nut in his mouth. I can't even read that with a straight face. All those people who are rich made a choice to be their best. Damn, so everybody that's poor, that's living out on the street made a choice to not be their best, I guess? I guess AJ4K's mama, because now she's popping pussy to pay the bills. She didn't make the choice to be her best. Okay, I can't take that seriously. I absolutely cannot take that seriously. AJ4K, find Elon Musk and let him bust a nasty, musty South African nut in your mouth. Don't come around here with that shit. We can't take that shit seriously. Anyway, I can't. That was funny. That was funny. Anyway. Vernacular postmodernism has dealt with the crisis of symbolic efficiency in a far less intense way than Nick Land, through metafictional anxieties about the function of the author, and in television programs or films which expose the mechanisms of their own productions and reflexively incorporate discussions of their own status as commodities. But postmodernism's supposed gestures of demystification do not evince sophistication so much as a certain naivete, a conviction that there were others in the past who really believed in the symbolic. In fact, of course, symbolic efficiency was achieved precisely by maintaining a clear distinction between a material empirical causality and another incorporeal causality proper to the symbolic. Zizek gives the example of a judge. I know very well that things are the way I see them, that this person is a corrupted weakling, but I nonetheless treat him respectfully, since he wears the insignia of a judge, so that when he speaks, it is the law itself which speaks through him. However, postmodernism's cynical reduction to reality falls short. When a judge speaks, there is in a way more truth in his words, the words of the institution of law, than in the direct reality of the person of judge, if one limits oneself to what one sees. One simply misses the point. Lacan aims at this paradox with his Les non-du errant. Those who do not allow themselves to be caught in the symbolic deception/fiction, who continue to believe their eyes, are the ones who err most. A cynic who believes only his eyes misses the efficiency of the symbolic fiction and how it structures our experience of reality. Shout out to Slur Wagatang. Shout out to Slur Wagatang 1905 for joining the conversation. Shout out to Slur Wagatang joining the conversation. Continuing here. Much of Baudrillard's work was a commentary on this same effect, the way in which the abolition of the symbolic led not to a direct encounter with the real, but to a kind of hemorrhaging of the real. For Baudrillard, phenomenon such as fly-on-the-wall documentaries and political opinion polls, both of which claim to present reality in an unmediated way, would always pose an insoluble dilemma. Did the presence of the cameras affect the behavior of those being filmed? Would the publication of poll results affect the future behavior of voters? Such questions were undecidable, and therefore reality would always be elusive. At the very moment when it seemed that it was being grasped in the raw, reality transformed into what Baudrillard, in a much misunderstood neologism, called hyperreality. Uncanny echoing Baudrillard's fixations, the most successful reality television programs ended up fusing fly-on-the-wall documentary elements with interactive polling. In effect, there are two levels of reality in these shows: the unscripted behavior of the real-life participants on screen and the unpredictable responses of the audience at home, which in turn affect the behavior of the on-screen participants. Yet reality TV is continually haunted by questions about fiction and illusion. Are the participants acting, suppressing certain aspects of their personality in order to appear more appealing to us, the audience? And have the audience's votes been accurately registered? Or is there some kind of fix? The slogan that the Big Brother TV show uses, "You decide," captures perfectly the mode of control by feedback that, according to Baudrillard, has replaced old centralized forms of power. We ourselves occupy the empty seat of power, phoning and clicking in our responses. TV's Big Brother had superseded Orwell's Big Brother. We, the audience, are not subjected to a power that comes from outside. Rather, we are integrated into a control circuit that has our desires and preferences as its only mandate. But those desires and preferences are returned to us, no longer as ours, but as the desires of the big other. Clearly, these circuits are not confined to television. Cybernetic feedback systems, focus groups, demographic surveys are now integral to the delivery of all services, including education and government. So what he is saying right here is essentially, in neoliberal late stage capitalism that we're living under, is no different than the worst aspects of Soviet dominance and control and surveillance. But the only difference is, instead of us being heavily policed and forced and badgered into making certain actions, we're sort of blindly following a certain path that's been put out in front of us, but we believe we are in control. We believe when we vote on who gets voted out of Love Island, that somehow we're in control of this monstrous behemoth billion-dollar entertainment industry, which we're not. We think that when we say we're not going to listen to so-and-so artist anymore because they made an offensive comment, that we're somehow in control of the media that we intake. We're not. It's all the illusion. It's all the illusion of control. And that's partially why I don't believe in free will. Partially, I know that we have no free social will, but when it comes to free universal will, it's hard for me to even reconcile that, because when I think about how we have no choice but to participate under capitalism, though we might resist it, I find that no different than saying I have no choice but to think, but to dream, but to make my heart beat. You get what I'm saying? But then again, maybe I'm just letting capitalism shape my worldview too much. I don't know. Let's continue here. This returns us to the issue of post-Fordist bureaucracy. There is, of course, a close relationship between bureaucracy, the discourse of officialdom, and the big other. Witness two of Zizek's own examples of the big other at work. A low-level official who, having not been informed of a promotion, says, "Sorry, I have not yet been properly informed about this new measure, so I can't help you." A woman who believed that she was suffering bad luck because of the number of her house, who could not be satisfied by simply repainting a different number herself, because it has to be done properly by the responsible state institution. We are all familiar with bureaucratic libido, with the enjoyment that certain officials derive from this position of disavowed responsibility. It's not me, I'm afraid, it's the regulations. The frustration of dealing with bureaucrats often arises because they themselves can make no decisions. Rather, they are permitted only to refer to decisions that have already been made by the big other. Kafka was the greatest writer on bureaucracy because he saw that this structure of disavowal was inherent to bureaucracy. The quest to reach the ultimate authority who will finally resolve K's official status can never end because the big other cannot be encountered in itself. There are only officials, more or less hostile, engaged in acts of interpretation about what the big other's intentions are. And these acts of interpretation, these deferrals of responsibility, are all that the big other is. If Kafka is valuable as a commentator on totalitarianism, it is by revealing that there was a dimension of totalitarianism which cannot be understood on the model of despotic command. Kafka's purgatorial vision of a bureaucratic labyrinth without end chimes with Zizek's claim that the Soviet system was an empire of signs, in which even the nomenclatura themselves, including Stalin and Molotov, were engaged in interpreting a complex series of social semiotic signals. No one knew what was required. Instead, individuals could only guess what particular gestures or directives meant. What happens in late capitalism when there is no possibility of appealing, even in principle, to a final authority which can offer the definitive official version is a massive intensification of that ambiguity. As an example of this syndrome, let us turn once more to further education. At a meeting between trade union officials, college principals, and members of parliament, the Learning and Skills Council, or LSC, the quango at the heart of the FE funding labyrinth, came in for a particular attack. Neither the teachers nor the principals nor the MPs could determine how particular directives had generated themselves, since they are not there in government policy itself. The answer was that the LSC interpreted the instructions issued by the Department for Education and Skills. These interpretations then achieved the strange autonomy peculiar to democracy. Peculiar to bureaucracy. Woo, okay, I fumbled that sentence. These interpretations then achieved the strange autonomy peculiar to bureaucracy. On the one hand, bureaucratic procedures float freely, independent of any external authority, but that very autonomy means that they assume a heavy implacability, a resistance to any amendment or questioning. The proliferation of auditing culture in post-Fordism indicates that the demise of the big other has been exaggerated. Auditing can perhaps be conceived of as a fusion of PR and bureaucracy, because the bureaucratic data is usually intended to fulfill a promotional role. In the case of education, for example, exam results or research ratings augment or diminish the prestige of particular institutions. The frustration for the teacher is that it seems as if their work is increasingly aimed at impressing the big other, which is collating and consuming this data. Data has been put in inverted commas here because much of the so-called information has little meaning or application outside of the parameters of the audit. As Eva Berglund puts it, the information that audits creates does have consequences, even though it is so shorn of local detail, so abstract as to be misleading or meaningless, except, that is, by the aesthetic criteria of audit itself. New bureaucracy takes the form, not of a specific delimited function performed by particular workers, but invades all areas of work, with the result that, as Kafka prophesied, workers become their own auditors, forced to assess their own performances. Take, for example, the new system that OFSTED, the Office for Standards in Education, uses to inspect further education colleges. Under the old system, a college would have a heavy inspection once every 4 years or so. That is, one involving many lesson observations and a large number of inspectors present in the college. Under the new, improved system, if a college can demonstrate that its internal assessment systems are effective, it will only have to undergo a light inspection. But the downside of this light inspection is obvious. Surveillance and monitoring are outsourced from Ofsted to the college and ultimately to lecturers themselves, and become a permanent feature of the college structure and of psychology of individual lecturers. The difference between the old heavy and new light inspection system corresponds precisely to Kafka's distinction between ostensible acquittal and indefinite postponement, outlined above. With ostensible acquittal, you petition the lower court judges until they grant you a non-binding reprieve. You are then free from their courts until the time when your case is reopened. Indefinite postponement, meanwhile, keeps your case at the lowest level of the court, but at the cost of an anxiety that has never ended. The changes in Ofsted inspections are mirrored by in the change from the research assessment exercise to the research excellence framework in higher education. Periodic assessment will be superseded by a permanent and ubiquitous measurement which cannot help but generate the same perpetual anxiety. In any case, it is not as if the light inspection is in any sense preferable for staff than the heavy one. The inspectors are in the college for the same amount of time as they were under the old system. The fact that there are fewer of them does nothing to alleviate the stress of the inspection, which has far more to do with the extra bureaucratic window dressing one has to do in anticipation of a possible observation that it has to do with any actual observation itself. The inspection, that is to say, corresponds precisely to Foucault's account of the virtual nature of surveillance in discipline and punish. Foucault famously observes there that there is no need for the place of surveillance to actually be occupied. The effect of not knowing whether you will be observed or not produces an introjection of the surveillance apparatus. You constantly act as if you are always about to be observed. Yet in the case of school and university inspections, what you will be graded on is not primarily your abilities as a teacher, so much as your diligence as a bureaucrat. There are other bizarre effects. Since Ofsted is now observing the college's self-assessment systems, there is an implicit incentive for the college to grade itself and its teaching lower than it actually deserves. The result is a kind of postmodern capitalist version of Maoist confessionalism, in which workers are required to engage in constant symbolic self-denigration. At one point, when our line manager was extolling the virtues of the new light inspection system, he told us that the problem with our department logbooks was that they were not sufficiently self-critical. But don't worry, he urged, any self-criticisms we make are purely symbolic and will never be acted upon. As if performing self-flagellation as part of a purely formal exercise in cynical bureaucratic compliance were any less demoralizing. In the post-Fordist classroom, the reflexive impotence of the students is mirrored by reflexive impotence of the teachers. DeAngelis and Harvey report that practices and requirements of standardization and surveillance obviously impose a huge burden of work on academics, and few are happy about it. There have been a number of responses. Managers have frequently suggested there is no alternative. Tina, and have perhaps suggested that what we need to do is work smarter, not harder. The seductive slogan introduced to dampen staff resistance to further change, which in their or our experience has a devastating effects on working conditions, attempts to couple the needs for change, restructuring and innovation in order to meet the budget pressure and increase competitiveness with staff's resistance not only to worsening of their condition of work, but also to the educational and academic meaninglessness of the changes. The innovation of the idea that there is no alternative and the recommendation to work smarter, not harder, shows how capitalist realism sets the tone for labor disputes in post-Fordism. Ending the inspection regime, one lecturer sardonically remarked, seems more impossible than ending slavery was. Such fatalism can only be challenged if a new collective political subject emerges. So basically what I've got from that chapter is basically that, you know, late stage capitalism, neoliberalism, however you want to frame it or call it or name it, creates the same sort of, you know, self-critical, pedantic, meaningless routines or practices that were so heavily criticized of the Soviet era or communism in general, right? That's what I got from that, which is very interesting. All of it ends up as just PR anyway. We're just doing these things to say that we have the best metrics, the best statistics, the best data, when really we're just advertising so that people believe in something and the value of what they believe in goes up. That's it. Pretty fascinating. This will be the last chapter we're reading today. We're going to jump into chapter 7 after this water break. That water tasted like pussy. Oh. Anyway, Nelson Moreno said, thoughts? I got my thoughts. What's your thoughts? I expressed my thoughts throughout this. What I got from that, once again, is that, you know, we're sort of living in this system that sort of makes us do ridiculous sort of things. And that's all about symbolism. Okay? Shout out to Pontus Ragmuson 4218. He said, what am I hearing? Water tasting like what? Water tasting like pussy. Water tastes like pussy. Anyway, we're going to continue reading Capitalist Realism right here by Mark Fisher. We're reading the last chapter for today, chapter 7. If you can watch the overlap of one reality with another. Capitalist Realism as Dream Work and Memory Disorder. Okay. Pontus Rasmussen said, "That's wild. Any context? I guess you've never listened to Plies. You're either very young or very white or very both, if you don't know the joke. If you've never listened to the rapper Plies, then obviously you would get that joke." But you're either very young or very white or very both. I will continue here. Chapter 7 of Capitalist Realism. If you can watch the overlap of one reality with another, capitalist realism as dream work and memory disorder. Being realistic may once have meant coming to terms with of a reality experienced as solid and immovable. Capitalist realism, however, entails subordinating oneself to a reality that is infinitely plastic, capable of configuring itself at any moment. We are confronted with what Jameson, in his essay, The Antimanes of the Postmodern, calls a purely fungible present in which space and psyches alike can be processed and remade at will. The reality here is akin to the multiplicity of options available on a digital document, where no decision is final. Revisions are always possible, and any previous moment can be recalled at any time. The middle manager I referred to above turned adaptation to this fungible reality into a fine art. He asserted with full confidence a story about the college and its future one day, what the implications of the inspection were likely to be, what senior management was thinking. Then literally the next day would have happily propounded a story that directly contradicted what he previously said. There was never a question of his repudiating the previous story. It was as if he only dimly remembered there ever being another story. This, I suppose, is good management. It is also perhaps the only way to stay healthy amidst capitalism's perpetual instability. On the face of it, this manager is a model of beaming mental health, his whole being radiating a hail fellow well-met bon homie. Such cheerfulness can only be maintained if one has a near total absence of any critical reflexivity and capacity, as he had, to cynically comply with every directive from bureaucratic authority. The cynicism of compliance is essential, of course. The preservation of his 60s liberal self-image depended upon his not really believing in the auditing processes he so assiduously enforced. What this disavowal depends upon is the distinction between inner subjective attitude and outward behavior I discussed above. In terms of his inner subjective attitude, the manager is hostile, even contemptuous, towards the bureaucratic procedures he supervises. But in terms of his outward behavior, he is perfectly compliant. Yet it is precisely workers' subjective disinvestment from auditing tasks which enables them to continue to perform labor that is pointless and demoralizing. The managers, we're going to stop right here. Go into the comments, all right? Pontus Rasmus is up in the chat. Shout out to Pontus Rasmus. Shout out to Austin Ford up in the chat as well. Pontus Rasmus is said he is good at talking fast. I'm reading a book here. I'm reading a book, and I'm actually going very slow. And if you didn't know, YouTube slows these videos down on playback. Trust me, I listen to them. But you shouldn't be listening to this content if you're not a native English speaker. Pontus Rasmussen, if you're not a native English speaker, I hate to break it to you, but you're either going to need some English lessons, which I can't help you with because that's what I do outside of YouTube. But this is not the place to be. We're reading high-level Marxist English text. This is not the place to be if you ain't about that life. Let's continue here. So, the manager's capacity to smoothly migrate from one reality to another reminded me of nothing so much as Ursula Le Guin's The Lath of Heaven. It is a novel about George Orr, a man whose dreams literally come true. In time-honored fairy tale fashion, however, the acts of wish fulfillment quickly become traumatic and catastrophic. When, for instance, Orr is induced by his therapist, Dr. Haber, into dreaming that the problem of overpopulation is solved, he wakes to find himself in a world in which billions have been wiped out by a plague that, as Jameson put put it in his discussion of the novel, was a hitherto non-existent event which rapidly finds its place in our chronological memory of the recent past. Much of the power of the novel consists in its rendering of these retrospective confabulations, whose mechanics are at once so familiar, because we perform them every night when we dream, and so on. How could it ever be possible for us to believe successive or even coextensive stories that so obviously contradict one another? Yet we know from Kant, Nietzsche, and psychoanalysis that waking, as much as dreaming, experience depends upon just such screening narratives. If the real is unbearable, any reality we construct must be a tissue of inconsistencies. What differentiates Kant, Nietzsche, and Freud from the tiresome cliche that life is but a dream is the sense that the confabulations we live are consensual. The idea that the world we experience is a solipsistic delusion projected from the interior of our mind consoles rather than disturbs us, since it conforms with our infantile fantasies of omnipotence. But the thought that our so-called interiority owes its existence to a fictionalized consensus will always carry an uncanny charge. This level of uncanniness is registered in The Laugh of Heaven, when Le Guin has Orr's reality-warping dreams witnessed by others, the therapist. Haber, who seeks to manipulate and control Orr's ability, and the lawyer. Heather Lilac. What then is it like to live through someone else's dream coming true? Haber could not go on talking. He felt it, the shift, the arrival, the change. The woman felt it too. She looked frightened, holding the brass necklace up close to her throat like a talisman. She was staring in dismay, shock, terror out of the window at the view. What would it do to the woman? Would she understand? Would she go mad? What would she do? Would she keep both memories as he did, the true one and the new one, the old one and the true one? Does she go crazy? No, not at all. After a few moments of bewildered fugue, Heather Lilac accepts the new world as the true world, editing out the points of suture. This strategy of accepting the incommensurable and the senseless without question has always been the exemplary technique of sanity but it has a special role to play in late capitalism, that motley painting everything that ever was, whose dreaming up and junking of social fictions is nearly as rapid as its production and disposal of commodities. In these conditions of ontological precarity, forgetting becomes an adaptive strategy. Take the example of Gordon Brown, whose expedient reinvention of his political identity involved an attempt to induce a collective forgetting. In an article in International Socialism, John Newsinger remembers how Brown told the Confederation of British Industry that business is in my blood. His mother had been a company director, and I was brought up in an atmosphere where I knew exactly what was happening as fast as business was concerned. He was, indeed, he had always been one of them. The only problem is that it was not true. As his mother subsequently admitted, she would never have called herself a businesswoman. She had only ever done some light administrative duties for a small family firm and had given up the job when she married, 3 years before young Gordon was even born. While there have been labor politicians who have tried to invent working class backgrounds for themselves before, Brown is the first to try and invent a capitalist background. Newsinger contrasts Brown with his rival and predecessor as British Prime Minister Tony Blair, a very different case. While Blair, who presented the strange spectacle of a postmodern messianism, never had any beliefs that he had to recant on, Brown's move from Presbyterian Socialist to New Labor Supremo was a long, arduous, and painful process of repudiation and denial. Whereas for Blair, the embrace of neoliberalism involved no great personal struggle because he had no previous beliefs to dispose of. Newsinger writes, for Brown, it involved a deliberate decision to change sides. The effort, one suspects, damaged his personality. Blair was the last man by nature and inclination. Brown had become the last man, the dwarf of the end of history, by force of will. Okay, Charlie Kirk would have loved this book. says Nelson Moreno. I don't think Charlie Kirk could have comprehended his book. Charlie Kirk was so fucking stupid, his brain might have exploded just reading the first fucking paragraph. That dumbass son of a bitch. Fuck Charlie Kirk. Anyway, continuing here. Blair was the man without a chest, the outsider the party needed in order to get into power. His joker, hysterical face, salesman smooth. Brown's implausible act of self-reinvention is what the party itself had to go through. His fake smile grimace. The objective correlative of labor's real state. Now it has completely capitulated to capitalist realism. Gutted and gutless, its insides replaced by simulacra which once looked lustrous, but now possesses all the allures of decade-old computer technology. Shout out to Kaladus up in the chat. Shout out to Kaladus for showing love to this live stream. Let's continue here reading Mark Fisher's Capitalist Realism. In conditions where realities and identities are upgraded like software, it is not surprising that memory disorders should have become the focus of cultural anxiety. See, for instance, the Bourne films, Memento, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. In the Bourne films, Jason Bourne's quest to regain his identity goes alongside a continual flight from any settled sense of self. Try to understand me, says Bourne in the original novel by Robert Ludlum. I have to know certain things, enough to make a decision, but maybe not everything. A part of me has to be able to walk away, disappear. I have to be able to say to myself, what wasn't, what was, isn't any longer. And there's a possibility that it never was because I have no memory of it. What a person can't remember didn't exist for him. In the films, Bourne's transnational nomadism is rendered in an ultra-fast cutting style which functions as a kind of anti-memory, pitching the viewer into the vertiginous, continuous present, which Jameson argues is characteristic of postmodern temporality. The complex plotting of Ludlum's novels is transformed into a series of evanescent event ciphers and action set pieces which barely cohere into an intelligible narrative. Bereft of personal history, Bourne lacks narrative memory, but retains what we might call formal memory, a memory of techniques, practices, actions that is literally embodied in a series of physical reflexes and tics. Here, Bourne's damaged memory echoes the postmodern nostalgia mode as described by Frederick Jameson, in which contemporary or even futuristic reference at the level of content obscure a reliance on established or articulate. Okay. All right. All right. I don't know what Gerandum is talking about, but shout out to Kamal. Shout out to Kamal up in the chat. Gerandum. What the hell are you talking about? Some of you, if you're gonna make a comment, make it make sense. I have no idea what y'all be talking about sometimes in the comment section. Anyway, let me know what y'all think about this. Let's continue here. So, on the other hand, this is a culture that privileges only the present and the immediate. The extirpation of the long term extends backwards as well as forwards in time. For example, media stories monopolize attention for a week or so, then are instantly forgotten. On the other hand, it is a culture that is excessively nostalgic, given over to retrospection, incapable of generating any authentic novelty. It may be that Jameson's identification and analysis of this temporal antimony is his most important contribution to our understanding of postmodern, post-Fordist culture. The paradox from which we must set forth, he argues, in Antimonies of the Postmodern, is the equivalence between an unparalleled rate of change on all the levels of social life and an unparalleled standardization of everything. Feelings along with consumer goods, language along with built space, that would seem incompatible with such mutability. What then dawns is the realization that no society has ever been as standardized as this one, and that the stream of human social and historical temporality has never flowed quite so homogeneously. What we now begin to feel, therefore, and what begins to emerge as some deeper and more fundamental constitution of postmodernity itself, at least in its temporal dimension, is henceforth where everything now submits to the perpetual change of fashion and media image that nothing can change any longer. Shout out to everybody in the chat. Shout out to Kaladus up in the chat. Shout out to Castrioti. Shout out to Castrioti up in the chat as well, as we are wrapping up and finishing our reading for today of Mark Fisher's Capitalist Realism, Chapter 7. No doubt, this is another example of the struggle between the forces of deterritorialization and reterritorialization, which Deleuze and Guattari argue is constitutive of capitalism as such. It wouldn't be surprising if profound social and economic instability resulted in a craving for familiar cultural forms, to which we return in the same way that born reverts to his core reflexes. The memory disorder that is the correlative of this situation is the condition which afflicts Leonard in Memento, theoretically pure anterograde amnesia. Here, memories prior to the onset of the conditions are left intact, but sufferers are unable to transfer new memories into long-term memory. The new, therefore, looms up as hostile, fleeting, unnavigable, and the sufferer is drawn back to the security of the old, the inability to make new memories, a succinct formulation of the postmodern impasse. If memory disorders provide a compelling analogy for the glitches in capitalist realism, the model for its smooth functioning would be dream work. I'm surprised he hasn't mentioned the film, The Matrix, yet, but I digress. So I'm going to go to the comments here. Gerandom says, Kirk was kind of talented, I heard, but the nature of his goals limited him to a basic set of values, nothing new. A modern application of old ideas. Yeah, there's nothing good to be said about Charlie Kirk because he was an anti-black racist. Literally, his last words were dog whistles about the inherent criminality of black men. Fuck Charlie Kirk. If y'all want to know where I'm writing that in the other live stream that we have going on simultaneously as this. I'm going to continue here. So, when we are dreaming, we forget, but immediately forget that we have done so, since the gaps and lacunae in our memories are photoshopped out. They do not trouble or torment us. What dream work does is to produce a confabulated consistency which covers our anomalies and contradictions. And it is this which Wendy Brown picked up on when she argued that it was precisely dream work which provided the best model for understanding contemporary forms of power. In her essay, American Nightmare, Neoconservatism, Neoliberalism, and De-Democratization, Brown unpicked the alliance between neoconservatism and neoliberalism, which constituted the American version of capitalist realism up until 2008. Brown shows that neoliberalism and neoconservatism operated from premises which are not only inconsistent but directly contradictory. How, Brown asks, does a rationality that is expressly amoral at the level of both ends and means, neoliberalism, interact with one that is expressly moral and regulatory, neoconservatism? How does a project that empties the world of meaning, that cheats and deracinates life and openly exploits desire, intersect one centered on fixing and enforcing meanings, conserving certain ways of life, and repressing and regulating desire? How does support for governance modeled on the firm and a normative social fabric of self-interest marry or jostle against support for a governance modeled on church authority and a normative social fabric of self-sacrifice and long-term filial loyalty, the very fabric shredded by unbridled capitalism? How, Sway? Shout out to Nelson Moreno up in the chat. He says, Kirk risked his neck just so he could speak the truth. He risked his neck so he could speak the truth. Absolutely. Absolutely. Anyway, but incoherence at the level of what Brown calls political rationality does nothing to prevent symbioses at the level of political subjectivity. And although they proceed from very different guiding assumptions, Brown argues that neoliberalism and neoconservatism worked together to undermine the public sphere and democracy, producing a governed citizen who looks to find solutions in products, not political processes, as Brown claims. The choosing subject and the governed subject are far from opposites. Frankfurt School intellectuals and, before them, Plato theorized the open compatibility between individual choice and political domination, and depicted democratic subjects who are available to political tyranny or authoritarianism precisely because they are absorbed in a province of choice and need satisfaction that they mistake for freedom. Extrapolating a little from Brown's arguments, we might hypothesize that what held the bizarre synthesis of neoconservatism and neoliberalism together was their shared objects of abomination, the so-called nanny state and its dependents. Despite evincing an anti-statist rhetoric, neoliberalism is in practice not opposed to the state per se, as the bank bailouts of 2008 demonstrated, but rather to particular uses of state funds. Meanwhile, neoconservatism's strong state was confined to military and police functions and defined itself against a welfare state held to undermine individual moral responsibility. And that's the end of chapter 7. Chapter 7 is one that I don't like. It's very theoretical, very heavy-handed written. I get the message he's trying to put out. Basically, how did capitalism morph into neoliberalism, and how does neoliberalism work together hand in hand with neoconservatism, a reactionary sort of ideology that wants to maintain types of hierarchy and maintain some things as profane or holy, when neoliberalism says that, you know what, everything is sort of a commodity and everything can be transported anywhere. You can get high quality Taiwanese hot pots in the middle of Saskatchewan, Canada. Yeah, because culture can be transported easily and commodified, right? So how does that work with neoconservatism? And he explained that basically they both hate the idea that poor people will get something for free. That's what neoconservatives like Ronald Reagan or George H.W. Bush or George W. Bush or Donald Trump, you know, the neocons, and Trump is a neocon. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. The neocons hate poor people, and the neoliberals hate poor people as well. The Bill Clintons, the Barack Obamas, the tech oligarchy before they went full-on right-wing techno-fascist. Everybody hates poor people because poor people can suck it. Fuck poor people, right? And especially if they're black or brown. Fuck them. That's the mind of the neoliberal and the neoconservative. So that's how they're able to put it all together. And he talks a lot about dreams and stuff in that, but yeah, I'm not really that fascinated in that. But we're going to be finishing this book tomorrow. We're going to be reading our last 2 chapters. There's no central exchange and Marxist super nanny. In Mark Fisher's renowned book, Capitalist Realism, Is There No Alternative? So hopefully you enjoyed this live stream. Hopefully you found this enlightening, engaging, fun, or interesting. Shout out to Nelson Moreno up in the chat. Shout out to Castriati up in the chat. Shout out to Caladus up in the chat. Shout out to Pointus Rasmussen. Shout out to Slur Wangatang, AJ4K, Fit TJ, Pedro, Noah, Clout, Himothy, NT1, Leah, and Vuk Turbo. Shout out to all of you for joining the live stream chat. I appreciate y'all. Y'all be easy out there. Catch you in a few minutes as we read 1 chapter of Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison pretty soon. But peace.